Hey, good morning, everybody, and welcome. Lovely to see so many of you joining us today for this session. My name is Nikelia Gregoire. I'm a technical specialist with ICA's Agricultural Climate Action and Sustainability Program. And today we're presenting to you one of the projects that we are implementing in the region, so various aspects of it that we have undertaken. And this is being facilitated through the Caribbean Climate Responsive Agriculture Forum. And so I will just give you a quick background on what the forum is, and I will pass on to Shalini, who will give you a brief background on the GCF project and what we will be presenting to you today. And so the CCRAF, as we term it, or CCRAF, the key objective for us for this platform is that we want to raise awareness and share knowledge of climate smart agriculture practices and international and regional issues that are affecting the agriculture sector. And in so doing, we want to build a community of interested and engaged personnel, including yourselves. And through that, we also want to promote enhanced coordination and collaboration among our stakeholders across the region. As you may well know, many of us, partake in a lot of similar activities, and to help do that more effectively, particularly address our climatic issues, coordination is very essential there. But one of the key aspects for us is that we don't want to only share information with you, share knowledge with you, but what we want to do is link and translate that knowledge to practical action on the ground. So we don't want it to just stay as information. We want to see the adoption and the use of that sort of information there. So this is a quick background on the forum. We have been established since 2015, and many of you here today would have already participated in that. And so now I will pass on to Shalini, who will give you a brief background of what the forum is, project is.
All right. Good morning, everyone. Nikelia, can you hear me?
Yes, I could hear you clearly.
Okay. One sec. I have to adjust. Okay, good. Well, good morning, everyone. Thank you, Nikelia, for kicking us off. And welcome to the first session of this 4-part webinar series, Strengthening the Foundation for a Climate Responsive Ag Sector in the Caribbean. So this is, I guess, by way of introduction, I am Shalini Maharaj, the project manager for the CARICOM AgReady Project, and we have with us here Kelly Witkowski. She's the manager of the Agriculture Climate Action Sustainability Program in ICA. And we have Dr. Chani Sin-Martin, International Specialist in Water and Soil Management, and you're going to be hearing from them both in a bit. We also have Ms. Shana Prevo assisting the project, together with Ms. Priscilla Segura. So just a very brief background and maybe a little bit of a story, if I were to follow my colleague Chani's footsteps. About a little over 2 years ago, ICA, with Chani and Kelly at the forefront, would have approached the GCF, the Green Climate Fund, to solicit a grant for something that was very novel, and they were successful in that the GCF provided ICA with a readiness grant for the first multi-country readiness project in the Caribbean. So it's also very novel in that it utilized a multi-pronged holistic approach, in that its objectives were 5-pronged, to include capacity building, strategic frameworks, not just national, but at a regional level, creation of concept notes, which ICA is in the process of doing, and then taking those concept notes to proposition Green Climate Fund again for much larger, again, multi-country grants, knowledge sharing, under which this webinar series is falling under, and pipeline development to create a pipeline of projects that would be able to assist not just the countries involved, but the entire region. So this project spanned 9 countries, Bahamas, Belize, Dominica, Haiti, St. Kitts and Nevis, St. Lucia, St. Vincent and the Grenadines, Suriname, and Trinidad and Tobago. And then in terms of, so because this was a holistic approach, this project saw a lot of training from in terms of national training to regional training with policy and decision makers that span the gamut to farmers on the ground. There was a lot of knowledge management, a lot of knowledge mobilization. We would have done a lot of analyses on barriers that each of the countries may experience from a socioeconomic standpoint, in terms of market and value chains. From a policy level, we would have taken a look at GHG inventory, creation of national frameworks, creation of national action plans, as well as training. We would have taken a look at the NDC analysis on how the NDCs are positioned. We would have done training and analysis on trade-off and multidimensional tools, something again that was novel for the Caribbean. So, and of course, we would have launched our very first virtual marketplace where the countries were able to go in and bid on projects and contribute to projects that can be used in the concept node to proposition further funding. So, interwoven in all of this, of course, gender and youth of maximum importance. So a lot was done and it's still happening with this project. And again, like I said, as part of the knowledge sharing aspect of this project, we are very happy to bring you this 4-part webinar series. This is our first session, and please do stay tuned for the rest of the other sessions. And with that, I would like to pass on to Kelly, who is our manager of the Agriculture, Climate Action and Sustainability Program, under which this project falls. So Kelly, over to you.
Thanks so much, Nikelia and Shalini, for that great introduction, and a very warm welcome to all of you. We're super pleased that you're here for this discussion in which we hope to really discuss and engage with you on how agriculture is really a part of the climate solution in the Caribbean, and make sure that we work together as people interested in the sector to really reframe the narrative and position agriculture and capitalize on the different opportunities that are being presented today in the face of climate change. What we plan on showing is a little bit discussing the role of agriculture as a fundamental part of the climate solution globally and in the Western Hemisphere. And then also then digging into the Caribbean context and what's going on in the region. And finally, closing out with what's being done and what's needed to move forward. And we have two really fantastic people that are going to comment at the end of the presentation. I have three main points that I want to try to get across today. One is that agriculture is often criticized or disparaged for multiple reasons. We know that agriculture consumes a lot of the water, is responsible for a lot of the land use, a significant amount of emissions, that there's always debates on biotech or on pesticide use, but that it's a sector that's asked to do quite a lot, and that makes multiple contributions to society that we really have to use to balance the narrative that's being put forth. Agriculture we consider really a nexus sector in that it links to almost everything, either feeding into or depending on many of the other sectors: energy, health, water, land degradation, food security, biodiversity, transport, natural resources, and tourism, and that agriculture is really a key lever for change, especially in the context of the climate situation that we're facing today. And finally, that addressing climate change in agriculture really provides multiple benefits, of course, for climate change, both from a resilience building and a reduction in the greenhouse gas emissions that are causing climate change standpoint, also broader environmental benefits, but it also provides a really significant amount of social and economic development benefits and can be a key driver of sustainability around the world, and in particular in the Caribbean region. I deleted the slide that I was going to start with, but what I wanted to show is that agriculture is a really important sector for Latin America and the Caribbean. We know that it's not without its challenges, but the agri-food exports are responsible for 27.5% of agri-food exports in the world. So the region is really playing a large role in helping to feed the people that live in this hemisphere and also the rest of the world. The region leads the market in tropical fruits, coffee, roots, tubers, oil seeds and cereals, and animal protein. So we're really providing a really diverse amount of products that are critical for nutrition. Agriculture is responsible for an average 5% of the GDP in the region, but that can go up to 50% in some of the countries. It generates a significant amount of foreign exchange. $276 billion in agri-food exports came from the sector in 2019. And it is also a really significant generator of employment. Of course, it varies by country. In Latin America and the Caribbean, the average is 14%, but that can get up to about 55% if you consider all of the other jobs that are provided in the rural environment, especially along the entire value chain. And so it's really a key driver for growth and development in the region. But we know that the sector faces some challenges. I put one on the slide here. This shows some of the yield gaps that exist in the region for some of the different products. And you can see that there's still a really significant opportunity to enhance the productivity of the sector, particularly in the countries that are on the lower end of.
Sorry, Kelly, your slide has not changed.
Yeah, I by accident cut this one out. So
it was hidden. You could go next. I unhide it. Go ahead.
Okay. So basically the point is that agriculture is an incredibly important sector around the world, one with which nobody could live without. And it provides a significant amount of social, economic, and environmental contributions to the region. And at the same time, we ask a lot of the sector. There's multiple demands at the same time that we make of producers and farmers and those that work in the sector. We want the sector to provide safe, nutritious food. We need the sector to be more productive to close those yield gaps that I just mentioned. We need to actually increase production levels to feed the growing population. At the same time, we reduce the impact on natural resources. We maintain ecosystem services. We restore and regenerate our natural environment. We ask the sector to provide employment and livelihoods, as I mentioned, for almost 50% of the population in some way is connected to the agri-food value chain, and also to be a key driver for socioeconomic development. And essentially, the Sustainable Development Goals, every single one requires a contribution from agriculture to be successful. But we know that among these multiple goals for the sector that there's a lot of trade-offs. And so we really have to decide at different levels, at the community level, at the regional level, the parish level, the national level, what do we want to prioritize? What is considered sustainable in each context, given the development needs of the population? And all of this we have to do under a changing climate. I put the graph there of temperature increase from 1950 to 2023, which I think is really quite striking, because we can see that the climate change is effectively happening. The past 8 years were the 8 warmest on record. We already have a global average increase of 1.2 degrees in temperature, and we know that we need to limit to 1.5 degrees to avoid the most catastrophic effects. The current climate commitments that each country has made with their nationally determined contributions or their primary climate plans will actually take us to 2.7 degrees. So we know that we still need a lot of action from all of the sectors that can contribute. In addition, climate change is causing over 5 million deaths per year, and air pollution, which is largely attributable to the combustion of fossil fuels, and phenomena like forest fires are also causing millions of premature deaths per year. So the agriculture sector is really in quite a challenging situation. And here are the greenhouse gas emissions by sector. You can see that agriculture, forestry, and land use, which includes both on-farm emissions as well as emissions from deforestation, are just over 18% of global emissions. But if you calculate the contribution of the food system itself, it can be up to 1/3 of global emissions because of the way that things are attributed. So if you use kind of from farm through to consumption and waste, food really has quite a significant footprint. The gases, the greenhouse gases from agriculture are carbon dioxide, which continues to be the most important, but there's also two other powerful gases, nitrous oxide and methane, of which the agriculture sector is the primary emitter. Methane primarily from enteric fermentation or livestock and rice, the use of fertilizers, manure management are responsible for nitrous oxide. And these are really important because methane is 30 times more potent than carbon dioxide, and nitrous oxide is about 300 times more potent. And I want to just take a second here to speak about methane because it is the second most important greenhouse gas and one of the fastest growing greenhouse gases, which accounts today for about 14% of emissions. It's also a major precursor to the formation of ozone here at the ground level, which of course negatively affects health and crop yields. 40% of methane is from agriculture, most of it from livestock, the rest from rice production. And methane is really important because it only stays for a short time in the atmosphere. Carbon dioxide usually stays for about 1,000 years. Methane stays for about 12. And this is important just because if we reduce methane emissions in the short term, we're essentially buying more time, reducing global warming quickly, which can give us time to then deal with more difficult cuts in carbon dioxide emissions. And there's lots of global initiatives, such as the Global Methane Pledge that was launched 2 years ago and has the goal of reducing methane 30% by 2030 across all sectors. And there's a growing recognition of the importance of methane. And you can reduce methane through practices like alternate wetting and drying in rice, changing varieties. In livestock, you can improve animal health and diets, which also have really significant co-benefits for productivity, efficiency, and competitiveness. And so these are things that can really help agriculture improve, like I said, its competitiveness, its production, its efficiency. At the same time, we help contribute to reducing or addressing climate change. So the relationship between agriculture and climate change is a complicated one. I already mentioned a bit about the emissions from the sector. These emissions have continued to rise, almost doubling in the past 50 years and expected to continue to increase because, of course, we need to continue to increase food production for the growing population. But the really good news is, and again presents a significant opportunity for agriculture, is that it can be a carbon sink. It can absorb or sequester carbon in trees and vegetation, but also in soils, which store more of the world's carbon than vegetation, trees, and the atmosphere combined. So it's really, really important. And there's a lot of opportunities for agriculture, not only to reduce its emissions, but also to enhance its sequestration, which again can have really important, what we call co-benefits or additional benefits for the sector in terms of building resilience, in terms of enhancing ecosystem services, increasing soil health, increasing water quality, and many others. Agriculture is, of course, also kind of a victim of climate change. Farmers are on the front lines of this. I think that everybody's aware that works in the sector, that the changes in the climate, changes in climate variability, changes in precipitation, changes in temperature, cause a whole series of impacts on the crop and the livestock themselves, which then result in a whole series of socioeconomic impacts in terms of production, productivity, food security, livelihoods, health, and a whole bunch of other factors. We know that it's estimated that agriculture we cannot limit warming to 2 degrees without a significant contribution from agriculture. And so really not only should be, but it must be a part of the solution. And a paper actually came out yesterday stating that global consumption of food alone could add 1 degree of warming by 2100, mostly driven by high methane products, the ones that I mentioned, meat, dairy, and rice, but that there is a significant opportunity to avoid this warming by improving production practices, especially focusing on the farm, and also looking at reducing food loss and waste, which is a significant source of emissions. And so agriculture, does have a significant footprint, but it also contributes significantly, as I mentioned at the beginning, to our livelihoods. We have to start to position agriculture in the global discussions so that they can advocate for the needs and priorities of the sector. And of course, this is not only risks for food security, this is risks for the economy. What I'm showing here is the World Economic Forum analyzes the principal risks. In 2023, you can see that at the top, the failure to mitigate climate change, a failure to adapt or build resilience to climate change, and as well as disasters caused by different natural hazards and extreme weather are some of the very top risks for the economy, both in terms of severity and in terms of the impact that they'll have. And an increase in these temperatures will continue to reduce the global GDP as we cross through the years. So we know that we can't achieve, in short, the goals of agriculture without addressing climate change, and we can't address the climate crisis without the agriculture sector. So what does this tell us? That we, as actors that work in the sector, really need to start to participate more in the climate processes to develop climate policy at the national level, in terms of the nationally determined contributions, the agriculture, the national adaptation plans, any plans that the country has to try to reduce emissions or emissions intensity. We need to be part of these discussions, and also at the international level. The agriculture sector has to show up to the forums that the Climate Change Convention and other international initiatives, again, to ensure that the priorities for the sector are taken into account, and also to help channel the financial and technical resources that the sector needs to help address climate change in the sector. We know that farmers alone cannot bear the brunt or the financial responsibility for investing in the different technologies and practices and changes that can be taken to help move the sector towards a more sustainable path. And so participating in and being a more proactive voice in these climate environmental discussions is really fundamental for the sector. And finally, I mean, what can we do about all this? I think, again, one of the great benefits of agriculture is that the solutions, both the mitigation in terms of reducing greenhouse gas emissions or enhancing sequestration, and building resilience or enhancing adaptation in the sector, most of the practices that we can do in agriculture can contribute to both of these. And so really investing in agriculture as part of the climate solution is an incredibly cost-effective, efficient way to help address the climate solution, particularly at the production level, where 80% or so of the emissions are generated within the agricultural sector. One of the key practices that I mentioned here have to do with improving soil management, which can, of course, enhance the amount of soil organic carbon, which has multiple benefits for the sector. So reducing greenhouse gas emissions, but also enhancing resilience and productivity for the sector. And so many of the solutions, so integrating agroforestry, integrating trees on farms, reducing agrochemical use. There's a whole suite of options that can really provide economic, and livelihood benefits for farmers at the same time they contribute to these global challenges. The burgeoning amount of global and regional climate initiatives focusing on agriculture, I think every day there's more that we can connect into, again, to drive resources to the sector. And investment in this sector is really key for food security, for energy security, for enhancing health of our population, protecting natural resources, and again, ensuring that the sector serves as a catalyst for change. And so now my colleague Channy is going to dig in a little bit more to the context of the Caribbean.
Thank you very much, Kelly, and good morning to all. I trust that you're hearing me very clearly. I would ask Nicalia to share the slide. Colleagues, I want to thank you very much from the inception for her. I know some of the information that will be presented, these are information that perhaps you're familiar with, but we are hoping that at least at this time it will resonate both individually and collectively from the point of taking action as opposed to perhaps listening to or knowing the facts. The facts are just one part. The more desirable part is what you do with the information to show that change in behavior. And so, colleagues, I want to again welcome you, and I want to perhaps crystallize and synthesize not only the Caribbean context, but also an individual and collective context through three key messages that is really under the banner of how do we move forward and towards a more climate responsive regional agriculture. And that is the theme of the presentation here today. And I want to perhaps present that as just 2 or 3 clear messages here. And these messages really relate to one, I'm going to ask you to take note. Take note of some things that are happening there. And once you have taken note, then the next step would be to take account. And also, I want you to also look at take regional action. So it's a very simple framework, a framework that I borrowed from Taylor 2011-21, and also the IPCC to some extent. And these are the simple messages here. Take note of what is happening. Please do take note of what is happening. Take account of where we're going and what this is causing. And I'm hoping that if you take note and you get a sense of the accounting where we really are in terms of the livelihood and the threats and the impact and what that translates into, then on an individual and also a collective level, that would provide a strong enough rationale to take action. And I'm going to go a little deeper into these 3 key messages here. The first key message I want to note here is this simple thing here. One is that we are not saying that the agricultural sector has not had to deal with the issue of climate change. They've had to have, or climate in general. The farmers have been dealing with this a long time there. And so I hear the echoes that this is not a new thing and what is so different about it. And this is what I'm presenting as the difference here. Yes, the farmers have been dealing with the climate issue here, climate-related risk. Yes, they have developed some coping mechanism, and more so they have developed a kind of familiarity with where these climate-related things happen, the variables, the patterns of how it happens. And so largely they have used that to adapt or to really cope with the stresses that are related to this climate thing here. And we know that any farmer, any person, even backyard farmer that would have grown, there's a familiarity that you get accustomed to, particularly when you're dependent on the rain for your production. And that in its sense is a kind of stress, but just like in everyday life, you learn to deal with stress, you learn to cope with it here. But the key point is that there's only so much you could carry. There's only so much that you could cope with if you are not managing that kind of stress, whether it's climate related or otherwise. And this is what I want you to take note of, because there is going to be a breaking point. And we are arguing here that the breaking point is now, and it is getting worse in the future, because right now the farmers themselves, they are really talking about the unfamiliarity with some of the seasons, some of the water, etc., some of the issues that they depend so much on their production here. And so the key message here, as it takes note, and that is where we're going to the technical, a very light technical thrust here, is that we are seeing a rise in the temperature, and it is already more than 1 degree Celsius. But the take-home message there is that even at just this 1 degree Celsius, and people may say, okay, it's just 1 degree, what is that fantastic thing? It has implications because by and large, agriculture, just like us, they are biological entities. And just 1 degree change in temperature could affect a whole set of things in terms of the performance. And more so in the context of society now, it is really threatening the reliability of the agricultural sector to be a key development pillar in the economy. And that has multiple functions or multiple impacts lying here. If we are now saying that these temperatures, agriculture is so sensitive to it that 1 degree increase, it is almost rendering or having us to second guess whether we could continue or what is the role of agriculture in the society to develop the economy, then that becomes a very critical issue. And I want you to take note of that point. That 1 degree here, just 1 degree, how much it is really leading to unprecedented things that they're dealing with, but it is already at the point where it is costing and proving very difficult to manage and threatening the whole thrust of agriculture as a developmental. So that is what I want you to know. 2 points on the take note. 1, we have been dealing with climate. We are at the breaking point, and just 1 degree, the sensitivity of agriculture towards the temperature is very important there, and it is really rendering it null and void or even threatening the ability of it. So as we move to the next slide, simple thing. So after you have taken note of that, I also want you to take into account these key messages here. And the key message is that with a 1% increase in the Caribbean, we are already incurring a lot of costs, considerable costs, just to adapt to the impacts of the climate here. And that, we know that in the case of Dominica, person that would have had some of the impacts of it, you would see that even that is putting us or testing the financial capacity of the countries to recover from this, the households to recover from this. And that is very important. And that I want you to take count of it from the simple point is, if you're accounting for this, how long can you continue taking these hits here? And how much is the true cost and how much is it affecting your daily life and agricultural sector there and your ability for not only food and nutrition security, but the general well-being and development of your society, etc. So I want you to take account of that. And this is why I put the money there. Most times when people think about accounting, they think of money. I'm asking the simple question, how long can we continue if that temperature increase is leading to a point that we as the Caribbean, whether individual or collectively, we are financially strapped to deal with these waves of the destruction or the impact that are caused not only to the sector, but the entire country. And I want individual responsibility and for you to vision this and ask yourself that while I just present this here. We have already seen the one, you go back to the other slide, we have already seen the 1% increase, and we are right now on a track of 2%, more than that. Kelly just mentioned the 2.7. And this is what we are seeing here. We are already seeing at this path that we are going on, we are seeing that the Caribbean already, in terms of the impact of climate change, the average impact of it is higher than the global, with more than 5% of the Caribbean GDP. And you're seeing that that is projected to cost 22 billion per year by the year 2050. And I'm thinking that it is actually, this is a very modest estimation. I'm thinking that in the case of Dominica, where you have almost 100 or 200 and something % of the GDP for one event, then you could see how this could multiply here should multiple countries suffer the same fate. But when you look at it here, even with conservative estimates, you are seeing that with these conservative estimates, almost the cost of these events, the climate events, these are going to account for 10% of the size of the Caribbean economy. And that is something for me, when you ask, can we do something else better with that 10%? Could we not get it or translate it into different sectors? That is a critical question that we need to ask. And how further we could go with 10% of our economy having to deal with that. The financial resources here have to deal with that on a continual basis there, while we have other issues to deal with, etc. And so this is very important because it brings into the dynamic that most of the Caribbean countries, and even at the household level, they are not in the position where they could continue doing this through the money that they are generating. And so therefore, the issue of external funding or external financial support becomes very critical. And not that we want to depend on it, but we have to respect the position that we are in, and we have to seek the opportunities of how are we going to get out of that position, how are we going to manage that situation, and therefore external support, and also what we are generating in terms of that financial portfolio or that mixture of options become very important. So colleagues, I want you to, we took note, now we take in account of how much it is costing us and where it is actually costing us here. And if that is the situation, what is the action that we are going to take? And is that not enough to prove some kind of regional action? Again, recognizing that from the point of taking note, it is not that we are saying that we have not had to deal with the climate-related issues in agriculture. We know that there are other issues in agriculture that the climate-related issue compound, but we are also saying that what is happening with the climate is unprecedented. And because it's unprecedented, we are also seeing that the response or the ability to cope or managing it is very difficult, both at the farm level and the country level. And so therefore, it requires a particular action of thinking that would assist in that regard, that breaking point that is being passed. And to make it clear, these are not things that are to be projected. I'm saying that these things are happening now. In fact, in terms of taking account, most of the events that happen in the Caribbean, they're related to water, hydrometeorological hazards, accounting for almost 85% of some of the damages and loss that we see. But more importantly, it affects the different subsectors of agriculture differently. So for example, in crops and aquaculture, etc., the main threat here is the flood. And when you look at livestock, drought, you get a lot of damages and a lot of loss through drought. And when you look at the forestry aspect, which persons often forget, these extreme cyclones, events, etc., that is where that accounts for that is what accounts for most of the damage. So that is very important for us to note here. And that brings us to the point that if we have taken note, we have taken the account, what are the actions that we are proposing here? And in that slide, and this, I put it in red, ready to get the attention here in terms of take action now, because even when the action is taken now in the Caribbean context, even if it is to address or develop initiatives that are related to hydrometeorological threats, there's a need for the evidence base to be there. And what I'm saying this is that even before in the agriculture, we spoke about it, we dealt with it, but the evidence, the amount of information that is needed to tweak, to make sure that we are doing the most with what we have and to make sure that we are able to plan for things coming, that is absolutely necessary now if we are to adapt to what is coming here. If we are to have a fighting chance of both taking account, taking a note, and using that information now to plan, execute, and evaluate and reassess, that regional action and that evidence base is very important so that we could learn how to sustainably finance the building of food security, livelihood along that resilient development paradigm here. And luckily or strategically, we do have some initiatives, applaudable initiatives in the Caribbean on the CARICOM level in terms of policies, in terms of action plans. We have some here, the Regional Food and Nutrition Policy. Many of you would have heard of the 25 by 25, the aim to reduce the regional import bill, all that within the challenge of climate change. And here, which is responsible for this webinar now, is one of the initiatives that we have sought the external funding for, which is essentially our Green Climate Fund project here. And so, colleague, I want to pause here for a while as we transit into, okay, now that we have said that and we are taking account as it relates to that, We have taken note. We have also taken this into account, and we are now saying that we need action at multiple levels. Then what is that action that we require? And that takes us to that transition point. If we take all of these 3 points together, essentially what that message, the key message that I want to leave you here with is that we are speaking about unprecedented climate-related impacts on agriculture. And that in itself renders the sector as an unreliable pillar, and therefore it emphasizes the need for strategic regional action to systematically build that climate resilience that we speak about as the foundation for food and nutrition security and livelihood security. And that is the key message. And it is a very clear message. What if we are able to manage this? What if we are able to use the data? What if we are able to strengthen the individual, institution, and collective capacity to do that here? Then perhaps we have a chance of making agriculture, positioning agriculture where it is supposed to be. So that transformative aspect is very important here, and everybody has a role to do with it, with the impending threat or the impending changes that are coming in here. So as we go to the next slide, this is essentially what that particular project, the strengthening the foundation for climate responsive agriculture sector in the Caribbean, took into account. It made the position that from the point of evidence, from information, yes, we may know certain things, but we need to ready that information. We need to do the requisite studies, talk to the people, talk to the farmers, collate this thing here, and try to decide what is perhaps the best approach that we could use, again, at a specific time. And so this is the readiness program. This is what we actually developed the project to do. We spoke about some of the barriers in the Caribbean context in terms of the issue of the inconsistent data, the data quality, to inform that, to get the best action there. We also spoke about the linkages between institutions in terms of the governance issue. And we also spoke about the limited technology and practice. Now, we know these things here, the issues as to the severities and understanding them better to actually develop an argument for a bigger project so that we could implement, learn, and improve. It is what we are talking about. So many of you here would know some of these issues there. We are not going to delve into all of these issues, but we wanted to share with you what we would have done in terms of taking that and translating it into a suggested form of action here. And this brings us to a quick summary of this project here. You would see on the left in the picture, it basically gives you a profile of the project. It tells you the amount, $1.2 million, 9 countries, 2 years. We are ending here in April, this next month, April. And there are a lot of products, but essentially these products, and I want to clarify that through the donor, this is what we call a readiness project, meaning that you have studies, you talk to people, you get reports to get that data that is needed to inform bigger initiatives. It is not a project where you actually could invest directly into the farm now. That is coming up. That is coming up hopefully from this project here, where we would have gathered the information, spoken to the people and the institutions, and therefore we could say, having done that, this is perhaps what we think may be a path to develop a project for investment on the ground. So I want that to be clearly understood here in terms of the expectation, in terms of the critique, and going forward with the suggestions. And in that particular project, all we are saying, and my colleague said it here, we found out earlier on that in the conversations, there is these climate finances available, and it has been available for some time. But for some reason, agriculture was not tapping into this fund here. In fact, out of a global amount of the funds here, even in the Caribbean region, out of more than $500 million, the agriculture only received 1% of that funding. All of the energy sectors, the tourism sectors, environmental sectors, they receive a lot of the funding here, and agriculture only received actually less than half or less than 1%, along with health as well. And so that really stood out to us. And we found out that perhaps the issue here is, do people in agriculture know about these opportunities, particularly how climate change has been shed as perhaps more of an environmental issue. And the issue is, if they're aware, do they have the capacity to actually act on it? Are they involved in the processes, the stakeholder engagement processes that will allow them to better understand and make use of that opportunity? So our project here looked at the issue of, one, are the agriculture stakeholders involved in these processes here in terms of making decisions as to where the finance is going and having that conversation? We also looked at the issue of, okay, if they're involved or not involved, how could we improve that system here? And more so, what are the projects on the ground? What are the interventions on the ground that perhaps look at some of the initiatives that are related to the sector or other sectors here? And where does that fit into the different agreements, different types of agreements and targets that countries have signed on to? We also looked at a whole barrier analysis to see what are the challenges, the market, the financial technology. We also looked at, if you're making decisions, what are the trade-offs? We know that we cannot depend on external funding to fund our development going forward. We know that we have to make a decision often between 1, 2, 3 things, a technology, or irrigation system and this. How are we going to make that decision, which is what we call the trade-off analysis? And we know that youth, to sustain this thing, the youth are paramount to sustain any transformative aspect in agriculture here. And so we look at the issue of how are we going to engage the youth? How do they look? What are their ideas? And how could we bring that together in terms of case studies, not only about the youth, but agronomy and all we have learned here, and create a kind of access portal where you, the persons that are attending that, could get access to that information so that you could get a better aspect and decide what can be done in terms of taking that action. And that leads us to 2 main things. Having understood all of that information or collated all of that information, we are now tasked with developing 2 regional proposals. And this is the highlight. We have had several consultations with a lot of the agriculture stakeholders, the institutions, etc., simply asking what should be in this proposal, how are we going to do it, how are we going to evaluate it, and where does it fit within the bigger vision of change on multiple levels. And this is the simple argument that we are making here in this project here, which is, if we are going to develop this transformative climate responsive agriculture sector, the participation and engagement of persons like you here, very, very important here. And other stakeholders are very important, not only in agriculture, but sister sectors. And if we are able to engage these people and get the requisite information or develop that information system that allows us to see, to quantify, to take account, then we, and at the same time, strengthen the capacity. All of these 3 elements together gives us a better chance or better pathway to develop a climate responsive agricultural sector. And colleagues, this is the fundamental argument. You will see a lot of the individual products that we have, but this is what we really wanted to open up and share with you so you get an idea of where we're going and why we are going there, and more importantly, what is your potential role to actually join us on that. So with that, I pass you back to main control. Thanks.
Thanks, Johnny. Thanks, Kelly. And thank you everyone for being here with us. So we have heard from Kelly from, giving us that global level of the impacts of the climate change on the agriculture sector, particularly, financially and that sort of thing. Then we went down into the Caribbean region and went into a bit of the current GCF Agriculture Ready project. And so now I open the floor for persons who have any questions, any comments, or require any sort of clarification going forward. So just feel free to, raise your hand, open your mic, or you could type your question in the chat. Yes, Dean, go ahead.
Yes, morning, colleagues. Thank you for the presentation so far. This is more of a comment, not necessarily a question, but a project of this nature is something that is much needed, especially a long time coming. We do have a lot of situations where like you're correctly saying, the investment that is required for us to take climate action and the whole climate responsive agriculture to build resilience, the level of investment that is required is often not clearly understood. So you find that we know that we have to respond, we know that we have to do something, but in terms of the amount of or the level of investment that is required, that is often lacking. So there is a lot of need for that data analysis to contribute to the process to justify expenditure and investment when it comes to, you know, that whole climate response when we talk about agriculture. Another important thing that has also come up in the presentations this morning is to look at the whole interventions that can take place at the level of the agriculture sector as something that contributes to environmental readiness. It contributes to the health of our societies. It contributes to other sectors. So again, especially from our governmental standpoints, to see investments in agriculture as investments in the overall sectors of all of our countries, because that is something that is very much overlooked. So thank you very much for that.
Thank you very much, Dean, for your comment. And as we know, resources, particularly money, is never enough. I don't know if you want to add anything there, give any reflections there, Kelly, before we go to our next person.
No, I think you're spot on, Dean. The stronger we can make the case, and the more that we can quantify it, the more people that we have advocating for it, the stronger links we can make with other sectors. I think we build that base for support, and we're going to have more success driving the technical and financial resources to the sector, and the support that the sector needs to adjust its trajectory will be much more effective.
Okay. We will now, thanks, Kelly. Ms. Greene, you could go ahead.
Thank you. I see in the chat there's a question from Vincent, and I think if that question can be addressed, mine is a good follow-up.
Okay, no problem. We'll take the question in the chat. So it reads, what is the planned course of action and timeline to get the two proposals developed?
Yeah, I'll take that, Nigeria. So the question, we're following the GCF process, and what we have been tasked as the readiness is to develop two concept notes. And so the concept notes we have developed through the consultation, two concept notes that at the end of the project would be reviewed by the DCF to decide on the development of the full proposal. We estimate that it will take an 18 to 24 month cycle. We are hoping to get it sooner. And a lot of we would have shared the elements of like these actions on previous consultation, but it really revolves around the issue of de-risking agriculture investment by stabilizing the agriculture production and productivity as it relates to climate hazards there. That's one element of it. And by de-risking, we are looking at basically how do we improve or implement best practices related to both the agricultural practices related to production and productivity, and also the issue of improving reducing post-harvest loss along the value chain, and also looking at how we can better use the waste that is being generated there into more useful agriculture products. We are essentially arguing that if we are able to look at it through these lenses, it will stabilize the farm enterprise, and it will be look more stable for investment, more consistent. And so as such, the second concept look at how are we going to agitate the financial institutions and take action that would encourage investment by the private sector, and also the issue of risk tolerance and mechanism to do that from the farm level. So that is just a synthesis of it here. That is where we are. So I want to clarify that right now we are at the concept note stage as it relates to the GCF. After that, we are hoping to get the invitation for the development of a full proposal. Thanks.
Okay, great. Thank you. So my follow-up question, I think, is about the first stage, because I believe, Dr. Saint-Martin, that you we're suggesting that only at the second stage would there be direct investment into business, for example. So I have some concerns. This is the Jamaican context, so I'll speak the bit about that I know about the Jamaican context. When there's the stakeholder engagement stage where there's data collection and I'm reading from your slide, needing to collect data and inventories, what I've noticed working with smallholder farmers is that there's just so much distrust because they don't know what the big picture is and where they fit into it, number one. Number two, they are incredibly under pressure, as you have said, from all sides, including predial larceny, which is huge. And what the pressures end up doing is adding another burden and in the day-to-day. And what I've noticed is when there's information that agencies and bodies want to gather from farmers, there isn't the room within the project to develop trust. It seems to me that the overall picture that you've outlined and the sort of crisis proportions of it are going to fall apart unless that trust is built, and it's built at the ground level. One of the ways that I've noticed that farmers feel like they can't participate in these kinds of initiatives is they are stretched for money. And so I wonder if there are incentives, monetary incentives, built into your first stage and all stages. And I think that that's going to be very, very crucial, as well as training. So for example, a lot of initiatives will offer training, but no compensation, or only things like maybe we'll pay for your transportation and maybe we'll pay for your food for that day. So the farmer has lost a day's work on their farm, which is crucial, in addition to a day's money or income on that day. So they lose twice to gain 1 day of participation. So I just really think that the details of that are going to be crucial from the get-go to building a level of trust over and over and over again. It's absolutely critical. That would be both my comment and my question. Are there incentives in that kind of regard?
Yeah, I could come in here, Nicolia. I could not agree with you more. It is something that I have personally agitated. In fact, we were in a call recently with the GCF here, and I quite blanketly told them that we really need to rethink how we design and we accept readiness projects for agriculture, mainly because of what you said there. In terms of because of the nature of agriculture in this sector, it's a very big pill to swallow, to go down on the ground and keep on asking for information within the cost value dynamics that you just and trust dynamic that you just described here. And so I'm one for the advocate that, and this is one of the feedback, and I think a lot of my colleagues would agree with me, that there is a need to change how the donors and not only the GCF view that kind of mechanism in terms of soliciting information there and not entirely thinking of the time loss value about that and the trust value there. So I'm totally in agreement. You actually made me smile when you mentioned that here. We did as much as we can to do that, but I would say that we are batting within the rudiments or the structure of the GCF. And at the same time, I would say that even through that experience, the issue is not only the trust here and the issue of the time loss and the value time loss function, but even when you go further, the need to balance that with not a free meal approach, so to speak. And so that there's an understanding that, yes, there may not be immediate returns in the full aspect that you would need or you would think it here, but that balance between, can you invest in this here for something that is going down the road that is not so immediate? And so there is a balancing act that should happen there. We have found out through other projects that too much of the, giving that and just doing that here creates a particular expectation and value that does not translate into the action or the uptake of it. They simply show up because there are these incentive or participate, but it does not translate. And so that is why in practical terms, in terms of the trust and the time loss function, I think the issue is how do we balance that? How do we design that in such a way that we do not create that monster there, but at the same time, we do not disregard the important things like trust and the farmer's time, or the person that is giving the information, their time to benefit in such an immediate way, a medium term way, and a long term way. So that is what I would say about that here. I really would like the opportunity in the future if we could perhaps talk about that. And if you have any experiences that you could share with us, we would definitely welcome it, because if we get the concept note approved, these are some of the things that we would want to translate into the development of the full proposal. So I thank you for that.
Thank you. And we just have a comment from Dean with regards to this discussion that it has to be, a partnership arrangement where the incentives of all parties, especially the persons doing the heavy lifting with respect to climate action, are in synchrony. Thanks for that addition there, Dean. So what we'll do now, we will take you, Renier, and then we will take a question in the chat, after which we'll take Kentisha.
Okay, I have a question, yes. Is there a mechanism, a board, or an organization to assist for moving agriculture products more easy within the Caribbean? For example, to overcome challenges like standards, logistics, etc. Thank you.
Yeah, I suspect I have to take that one as well. Rainy, I was really hoping that my other colleagues, and just so that you know that, if you are familiar with ICA and ICA's work here, this is just one particular program unit in ICA. We deal with the climate change, but there are other units in ICA, programmatic units that deal with the issue of trade, that deal with the issue of family agriculture, bioeconomy, etc. like that. And so I wouldn't want to profit any detailed information in terms of that, mainly because if you're a cricket fan, I'm a kind of a Jimmy Adams. I bat within my crease as much as I can. But with that said, I also wanted to tell you what I know of is that I know that Export Caribbean, through the various different agencies, national agencies, Export PT, Export this, they were mandated to actually assist with that. I know my colleagues from Barbados, I know Mr. Alistair Glean and also Diana Francis, they would have been working with smallholder agriculture, smallholder medium to actually do that export facilitation. They had several trainings where they brought persons together. There is actually a cohort in Trinidad here now that ICA is working with to bring them up to that level for export readiness, for standardization, even testing of their products, etc. So if you want further information about that, please let us know and I could put you in contact with our colleagues to give you the detailed answers. So I'm not scoring ones when I should be scoring sixes. Thank you very much.
Yes, please. Thank you. Thank you, Nikilia.
Welcome. We'll take Onisia's question in the chat, and I think Kelly will answer that. The 2.7 that was mentioned during the presentation, could that be explained again? Is it that temperature has increased by 2.7 degrees or percentage?
Okay, so that figure is that based on the current climate commitments that each country has made, they put us on a path towards an increase of 2.7 degrees by the year 2100. But the important thing to note there is that that is if all of those plans are actually implemented. So, there's room for, obviously we know that a lot of plans and commitments are on paper and we don't achieve them. So we know that we have to actually even be more ambitious in the commitments, because that really needs to come down. It should come down to at least 1.5 degrees. And then we really need to put the pedal to the metal and make sure that the countries and the different sectors and actors in each country have the ability to actually take the action that's going to result in that planned reduction. So it's degrees. And I wanted to just mention, just in response to a couple of the questions, I mean, something that we as a program in ICA do is we work all the time collaboratively with the other programs, as Chenny mentioned. So there is a bioeconomy program that's looking at how do we add value, how do we create a more circular economy in agriculture. We have a digitalization program that's looking at how to use digital tools to help information get to farmers. We have an agricultural health and food safety program that also has a lot of work on reducing or working with farmers to make sure that the right level of agrochemicals, in particular pesticides and fertilizers, is used, not in excess, and that the least dangerous kind are used, so which can also contribute to reduction in emissions. We have a gender and youth program that we also work with. And so again, that goes to the fact that agriculture is a nexus sector and that climate affects every aspect of agriculture. And really, we need to work with everyone. And just in response to the question about our incentives for consulting with farmers, I think it's also a larger structural barrier, the way that a lot of these international climate funds and other financing, other international development financing kind of is designed, because there's very tight timelines and heavy expectations, and we need to constantly push back on those. And that's why we also say that agriculture needs to really participate in these discussions, because a lot of times, you know, donors will come in and they want us to start a project, and we say, well, you know, if you want to work in that specific crop, you know, you need to start, you know, way in advance of the season so that you can get the inputs to farmers. I mean, there's all different intricacies of the sector that a lot of people outside of it, outside looking in, don't fully understand. And the other way that ECO works is, of course, partnering with very much more community-based and local organizations that have gained that trust, and so we can learn from them and work through them for the greatest benefit of the farmers.
Hopefully. We will take Kentisha and then we'll go to some of the questions in the chat. Go ahead, Kentisha.
Good morning, everybody. I hope everybody's doing absolutely amazing. Thank you so much for the opportunity to speak. But I think a lot of my questions were answered in the two speakers that spoke prior to me. One of the questions were based on basically using stakeholders in the community who are already working with these farmers, who already have the trust, for example, like extensions units, and that was explained just prior to me. And also I have another question based on creating a standard for farmers as an incentive. So for example, some sort of certification or a standard that saying that these farmers have went through this training, or these farmers are aware of this process and they are using climate readiness on their farms, and this is a brand or some sort of logo that they can either place on their farm or their products that are coming from their farm as an incentive. But that's it for me. Thank you so much for the opportunity to speak.
Thanks very much, Kentisha, for your feedback there. If Chani or Kelly, you all want to add in anything, we can take the questions in the chat.
I would just say,
Go ahead.
go ahead. I was just going to say that I think, you know, voluntary standards can certainly be a useful tool, but the label in and of itself is never really enough. It has to come with kind of the standard. It has to come with the quality, the assurance and verification programs, and of course the training and technical assistance to farmers. I mean, I'm sure, and I think, you know, it also has to come with a legitimacy and a recognition on the consumer side. And so I think standards can be well worth it. It can be a significant investment the way that it's done on, but the legs they stand on are really, it's really important to have transparency and create a trust in that label. So a process that I think does take a significant amount of time, and that in the Caribbean, I think could certainly be done across countries, because to get the label recognition, it can sometimes be very, very challenging for producers to, or for consumers to pay a, how do you say it in English, like an additional price to compensate the farmers for the better practices that they're doing. So I think that the label in of itself within a broader system can certainly be one avenue that can be better explored in the region.
Okay, lovely. You wanted to come in again, Chani, or we could go ahead? Okay. And so we have a question from Laura asking, can you give us an idea of a working example of this in action? What does it look like when it works? In terms of this question, Laura, are you referring in terms of the project? If you could give a little bit more clarification.
Thank you. Thank you for taking my question. Yeah, it like when we get to the point where, you know, to the next phase where the funding is available and it's sort of like the implementation phase, which would be after this. I think I have that correct. Is it when it works and in an ideal scenario, what does it look like on the ground? Does that make sense?
Sorry, I was hearing you in and out, Laura. Laura.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, sorry.
Thanks, Jenny. It's like when we get to the implementation phase, beyond this, right? That's the next step. I think I have that correct. Is that what does it look like when the program is working and it's successful? Not in terms of, you know, massive climate change, but just, you know, even small pieces of what does it look like in the islands? What does it look like for farmers? What does that success look like?
Yeah, I get you. Thank you for that, man. Laura, you sound like somebody right after my heart, man. The on the ground kind of thing. All right.
Yeah,
Laura,
yeah. Thank you.
yeah, I would say two things before I get into that. Well, one thing is that we are the process where the next stage is not funding yet or on the ground work yet, not implementation. The next stage would be submitting the concept notes, getting through the GCF to develop it, show interest in it, and we have to develop it. And then when we develop it, then we hopefully get funded for it, and then it goes onto the ground here. So just to clarify that this is where we are. However, the point about what does it look like on the ground? I'll tell you personally, you know, what is the engine that I'm seeing on the ground? How am I visualizing this here? The first thing I'm visualizing is that, and this is the argument that we are selling here. There are fundamental issues or inputs, which is the water and the soil here. And we are talking about, even if you choose to remove the climate from the scenario here, there are issues here with on the ground, how could I best manage water? How could I best manage soil here? And I'm saying that I'm seeing this here. How could I best manage that in terms of the risk of my production is managed and it is reduced? And so there's a consistency in my production. And so therefore, because there's a consistency in my production level and productivity, then I have something that looks more attractive from the investment, whether it is to secure a loan or even to apply for grants, etc. So I'm looking at it from the point of, can I develop a farming enterprise that is more stable, that is more predictive within that value here, and use that as a value proposition for moving on and sustaining business? In terms of exact terms, for example, one of the things that hit me on the ground here, and it's a common practice as it relates to some of the water management practices, that because the farmers are on the ground here, the issue of how much more water do I use, when do I irrigate, how could I increase my irrigation, my water use efficiency, that in concrete terms under both drought and under the issue of flood is a real issue. So if you could, this intervention with the agroecological practices, if we are going to introduce something that, okay, on your farm, if you're managing water, it is not just about rainwater harvest water, how much you add, it is how much you could retain in the soil, particularly during the drought here, and how does that go into different areas there or maximize your yield potential. And so therefore, foundational practices, if I go on a farm and I see a farm that is looking at climate resilience, there are some foundational practices that I'm expecting or hoping that the farmer would implement. So for example, I'm hoping to see on the ground a good management of the organic matter being re-included into the soil. I'm hoping to see, depending on the needs, a cover crop, covering of the soil, not the bare soil. And I'm hoping to see some kind of information system or some kind of at least record keeping that starts to tie the knots and say, hey, if I'm going to build a climate resilient farm, if I'm going to build just a better enterprise, these are some of the foundational practices that I'm going to implement. So this is what I'm seeing that the project in terms of an intervention could lead the pathway to do? What are these foundational practices that even without all of the acute information system, that there's enough out there to say that if you implement this and you manage it in such a way, it would lead to a more stable enterprise that could be a value proposition in terms of securing financial resources or even the security of livelihood. So that is what I'm seeing in real terms. There are many other examples here, but I just wanted to share that with you, particularly the sharing between farmers, the system, the information, the peer-to-peer, and all the ICTs that are related to this. Thanks.
So thank you so much. So if I get it right, then what
it is like to make sure that the farmers get the knowledge in order to enable them to do all of what you just said.
Yeah, not only that too, Laura, because often we think of it just one way around. I just actually read something from you, actually, some research data. I wrote this out. We actually get it wrong, and I'm very proud of the initiative that you are doing here, particularly because it's farmer to farmer led. Mainly because we often say get the knowledge to the farmer, but a lot of times I can tell you it is the farmers getting the knowledge to us, and perhaps we add into how it could be optimized. Because a lot of the things, and I hope that came out in the presentation when I said that farmers have a history of dealing with climate-related risk. It is not that this is just something new in the sense of we never had to deal with climate before. So that issue of creating that gateway where we as technical persons or we as implementers are open, first of all, to realize that these are experts or in terms of dealing with what's on the ground. They have the knowledge, they have the experience that we need to listen to, appreciate, learn from, particularly indigenous practices, etc., and see how we could put together and share. It is not we just coming like a teacher thing doing here. And so that is why, again, I love what you're trying to do here, what you're starting to do, and I definitely think that that is something that ECA could assist with in getting that peer-to-peer, a kind of an ICT, a kind of a thing that was designed by farmers, and it includes that peer-to-peer information sharing with institutions. So we could definitely have a talk on that, Laura, sometime after that.
Thank you so much. I appreciate the support. Thanks.
And I think that what we're going after is more of a co-innovation system. We know that there's no technology transfer per se in agriculture. I mean, it has to be, working with the farmers so that they can adapt and decide to adopt these practices. And success is really when the farmers are able to adopt the practices that they want, and when they maintain them throughout time, because there's a recognition that they are contributing to them, economically, like that it's feasible for them. At the same time, we're achieving these other benefits that are valuable for the broader community, and that those farmers and the farmers next to them see that, and there's more of this kind of organic adoption and ownership of practices that will, as Chenny said, enhance the stability and resilience of their farming enterprises and enable them to access the finance, de-risk essentially their enterprise and allow them to access the finance that enables them to take even more steps towards sustainability, and that they're able to do this because there's a broader system that's in place to support them.
Yes, so we will take now a question in the chat, and it reads, is agricultural biotechnology a part of this approach to promote resilience and productivity? I know the subject of GMO is very controversial, but it is a viable option that we cannot ignore. So Chani or Kelly could decide.
I can take that one. So yes, biotechnology, I think it's in its broad sense, not specifically focusing on necessarily on GMOs in and of themselves, is certainly an important part of this. We know that improved varieties that can enhance drought tolerance or salinity are a really fundamental part of enhancing resilience. And so I think when a lot of people think biotech, they automatically kind of get drawn into the GMO part, but the hybrids, the nanobiotechnology kind of, fermentation. So in terms of biofuels and composting, there's all sorts of things in biotech that certainly enhance both resilience and productivity.
Okay, thanks, Kelly. I saw we had another question that would have been responded by Kelly there. Just check. Okay, so we have one from Kenny. We know that there is a relationship between farming practices and the effects it has on the sea, which can affect aquatic life. Can we promote better synergies between the land-based activities and the environmental effects on the sea?
Of course, I think that's a really important topic. That's what we a lot of times it's referred to as the ridge to reef approach. We actually have an existing project looking at nature-based solutions and climate smart agriculture, mostly in upland areas, as a way to improve the health and resilience of marine and coastal areas and livelihoods, where we're looking primarily at installing vetiver systems and also improving practices on farms upstream to reduce erosion and agrochemical runoff and enhance the health of the reefs and the fisheries below. So I think that there's a lot of synergies in encouraging discussions between communities that have these connecting agroecosystems is a really key part of also the climate response.
Okay, thank you. Do we have any more questions? There are no other questions in the chat. Does anyone have any burning question before we go into the closing? Anything you want a bit more information on or clarification on?
Okay, I see Dean hand is up. I don't know if that is from before. And after him, I do want to just make 2 comments.
No, that would be from now. Dean, go ahead.
Yeah, just quickly. Again, one of the things, and I hate keep coming up over and over again, we're talking about the various approaches and whatnot, and that's good for us to think, really think outside the box, think of the whole system as not just agriculture, but the whole ecology associated with agriculture involving other sectors. Yes, from the agriculture in terms of practices standpoint, my opinion is that the best case scenario is where we can effectively marry interventions that will bring economic benefits, sustain economic benefits to producers, agro-processors, and everybody along the value chain when it comes to agriculture production. Marry those practices with the economic sustainability, at the same time achieving those climate mitigation co-benefits. That's the best case scenario. That's what we're working towards. So at the end of the day, it would not just be an investment from the standpoint of, okay, we're doing this for the environment, because producers don't really care much about the environment. The efforts are always to increase economic gains, always increase production, increase productivity, and so on. So at the same time, we try to achieve those climate mitigation co-benefits while we're addressing the economic sustainability of interventions.
Thanks, Dean. And if we could get a wrap up from Chani and Kelly, and then I will do a quick closing on some information on our following webinar.
Yeah, I'm not too sure if this is too much of a closing here. What I wanted to do before we close off, because I think it's absolutely important that we do this here, is to clearly state that what we are proposing here, it is not a fix to everything in the agriculture system or that. It is not that. I hope we are not selling it as that panacea of things there, that silver bullet, so to speak. We definitely know that there are other works that has to be done We are looking at this as a strategic trigger, input to actually do that, but there's no way that the investment that we are looking at, given what I said in terms of the take note of the deficit where we are in terms of if we are to adapt to it, that this particular project or even the two projects that we are visualizing and hope comes to fruition would address all aspects in agriculture. Right? So I want that to be very clear here, because I do not want it to be that we are hinging all our efforts and we say, well, there's a project to do that, so we don't have a part to do it, or we don't look at other things there. That is not what we are saying. We are saying that while we are doing some efforts here, and we are mindful of this particular caucus or collection of intervention framed on our project, you and your institutions and collaborations with your institutions, there is a role for us to continue to play here. So I want to get that clear. The other point I want to get very clear is that often, and I do take blame for that as well, and it does take a certain shift in the mentality or the perspective, that often that while I do resonate or connect very close to on the ground with farmers, too often that we have seen a lot of projects develop and focus primarily on the farmers or the supply side, and it does not trickle or it does not go through the value chain. And so therefore, there is a thing there that we have to address, that if we are serious about agriculture, we cannot only be talking about the farmers, etc., as if farming or agriculture is only at the farm level. And that for me is a fundamental shift in terms of when we design the project. And this is why we are thinking that this one has to be along the value chain as much as we can. And so I wanted to underscore that too, because a lot of the critique will always be like, is the farmer included? And there's no thing that is the processor included, is this included? And that inclusivity argument is relevant if we are seriously to address some of the issues in the agricultural sector. The last point I wanted to make there too is that, and Laura, I'm saying this to you because it's a word that I do not really like to use. I did use it there in terms of the experts, and I used it very loosely here. I do think that the farmers and even us, that they are the ones that are facing that they are on the brunt, and they have a wealth of knowledge to really address or even bring to the table as it relates to the solutions. And I do think that there's much more that could be done for us to stop and listen and appreciate that and take that on board, as opposed to the other way around, a technician or somebody that perhaps have not done a day of farming or thinking that they're in the position to know the reality of the farmers and what goes on in head for making decisions here. And so I wanted to say that, and along the lines that Dean said, you did make my work easier here for me in terms of this point here. The only thing I would say in terms of just a slight adjustment here is that we cannot continue, in my mind, with the place where the producers are doing it for just the money or the economic thing here. I think somewhere in there it has to resonate that while you are doing this here, the continuation of your business continuity hinges on your awareness and your actions, so how you treat the environment. We cannot just continue, and we learned that lesson from the bananas, the monocropping, etc. We cannot continue in that modus operandum. There has to have a greater sensitivity into that production or that supply core. And so I just wanted to leave that with your colleagues as we head back to Nikhila. Thank you very much, though. Nikhila did say that I was supposed to do a closing out. Thank you. On my part, I just wanted to say thank you very much, and I hope that some of these things resonate more, not in terms of just facts and information, but really as an impulse or propeller for strategic action and collaboration. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chenny, and I will turn over to Kelly for any closing thoughts.
No, I just really appreciate the discussion and thank all of you for the interest and engagement. I think together, working together is the only way to get a lot of the traction that we need and draw attention and energy towards the sector in a way that is farmer focused, science-based, and allows us to really address the short-term challenges that the sector and our societies face, as well as, consider these evolving climate and environmental challenges that we also need to address. And just really remember that agriculture, a lot of the actions that we can take add these additional benefits of income, competitiveness, stability, so that there's really multiple reasons to do this. And together, I think we can try to confront or reduce a lot of the barriers to implementation and accelerate action for the benefit and the food security and livelihood security of so many people in the region. So thank you.
Thank you, Chani. Thank you, Kelly, for all what you have shared today and all your feedback on all the questions. I do hope everyone have, received relevant information that they can use here today. And so we will be having another session next week. And I have placed the link to register in the chat. And for those who missed it, I am sending it again now. And so also you would have seen a feedback poll on your screen for those of you who have not completed it. Grateful for your feedback to see how we can improve our follow-up sessions. And so next week we will be delving a bit into agriculture greenhouse gas data collection in the Caribbean. And so we'll be providing some information on the component of that, how this was done, the importance, of the greenhouse gas emission management data for the region, and some of the best practices for the inventory, and also some of the trainings that are being offered by the Greenhouse Gas Management Institute. And so we will be delivering some information on that. And I would just like to say a very huge thank you to all of you for participating here today. I do wish everyone a pleasant ending of the week, and we look forward to having you next week. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye, everybody.
Have a good